Hi, I'm Trevor Ellis, Head of Service here at Recon Power Bikes, and today I'm going to show you how to assemble a HUMMER EV all-wheel drive e-bike. Let's get started. Before we get started, let's inspect the box. Make sure that there's no damages to the cardboard at all on either side, on the front or back side. If there are, definitely give us a call and let us know. Let's go ahead and cut the bands using some snips. Open up the box. Now that you have the box open, go ahead and remove the contents from inside. Pull out your toolkit and set it aside. Remove your foam. And then remove the rack. All that's left is the bike. I recommend laying the box on its side if you were to do it by yourself, or grab another person to help you remove the bike from the box. Now that you have the bike out of the box, be sure you are cutting only the zip ties. Do not cut any of the hoses or wires. Make sure you look before you cut. Now that we have some items removed, let's take a closer look. We have your fenders here, front and rear, your rack, and your toolkit. Let's take a look and see what's inside the toolkit. Here's your toolkit box. Go ahead, open it up. Inside is your light, your toolkit, the mounting hardware for your rack, and the pedals. And last but not least, it's going to be your charger. Set them all aside so you won't lose them. Here are the tools required for the bike. You'll have a 19mm wrench, an 8 and a 10mm wrench, a 3mm, 4mm, 5mm, and 6mm hex wrench. And then the necessary hardware for the bike is going to be a long bolt, 4 medium bolts, and 2 small bolts. Now that we're starting the assembly process, you'll notice that the stem is on backwards. So we'll go ahead and flip that around and ensure that the preload is set correctly. To set the preload, you'll need your 5mm hex wrench, and go ahead and snug it down. You want to make sure that your spacers underneath the stem do not move. If you need to make micro adjustments, do so as necessary to eliminate any movement with the spacers below. Next, you will remove the faceplate. Using your 4mm hex wrench, you will go ahead and undo the 4mm bolts. Now that the faceplate is removed, you will go ahead and install your handlebars. While installing, make sure all the controls are facing towards the rider while staggered over the head tube, and the brake levers are facing out. You'll go ahead, reinstall your faceplate using your 4mm bolts and your 4mm hex wrench. Now that your handlebars are installed, hold off on making fine-tune adjustments until your front wheel is installed. Next, we'll go ahead and put some grease inside the seat tube. Putting grease inside the seat tube will minimize any corrosion that happens over time. You'll then apply a thin layer of grease on the inside of the seat tube, and then install your seat post. Next, we'll go ahead and install the pedals. Next, we'll start with the right pedal. It is labeled R for right. Apply a small layer of grease on the threads. And go ahead and thread it in place. Next, you'll use your 6mm hex to tighten on the back side of the pedal. Follow these steps for the left side. Note, when installing the left pedal, the threads will tighten counterclockwise. Use your 6mm hex wrench to fully tighten on the back side of the left pedal. Now is a good time to go ahead and put the rear rack on along with the rear fender. Let's get started on it. You'll put the rear rack above the rack mounts and secure it with the 2 medium bolts. Once you have installed the 2 medium bolts on the right side, follow the same steps for the left. Next, you'll go ahead and install a washer and ensure that there is a washer on the outside and the inside of the bolt. Then you'll secure it with the 10mm nut. Do so for all 4 bolts. Now that all the nuts are fully tightened, ensure that they are all snug. Next, you'll go ahead and install the fender. Slide it into the back side of the rack, and then keep it in place with the 4mm small bolt. Next, you'll go ahead and install the 5mm small bolt into the rack mount, and then followed by 1 washer and 1 nut on the back side. Next, we will tighten the fender bolt to the rack using a 5mm and a 10mm wrench. Snug them up to your desired height of the fender. I recommend sliding it up all the way, just so that it's out of the way. Next, you'll go ahead and position the fender using 1 hand and then tightening with a 4mm bolt with your 4mm hex wrench. Sometimes the front fender hardware does not come installed on the bike. However, in this case, it does. Go ahead and remove it so that we can install the front fender and front headlight. Next, we will go ahead and install the fender. Use your fender stabilizing bracket on the back side before you install your fender. Holding the fender in place with 1 hand, you'll go ahead and install the light. Holding all 3 in place with 1 hand, you will guide the bolt in place into the fork to hold them all together. Next, you will install the washer and 10mm nut on the back side of the bolt. Thread them together, followed by using your 5mm hex and your 10mm wrench. Before tightening all the way, position your front headlight in place so it is straight up and down. Next, we will go ahead and plug in the light. Ensure that your arrows on the light fixture meet together while plugging in. Before installing the wheel, make sure you remove the brake pad spacer. If you do not remove this spacer, your rotor cannot go inside of the caliper. When installing the front wheel, take note that the safety washer needs to be in the downward position upon installation. This will keep the motor from rotating inside the dropout of the fork. Place that all the way on the inside, followed by 1 washer and then the axle nut. Do not thread them all the way in, just keep them open enough to put the wheel into the dropout. Next, you'll go ahead, lift the bike up underneath the fork, and position the wheel just underneath the fork. Set the fork down onto the axle. You may need to rotate the wheel to get the axle all the way into the dropouts. Push down on the fork to ensure that the wheel is fully seated. Once the wheel is fully seated into the dropouts, using your 19mm wrench, you will tighten your axle nuts. Tighten in an alternating fashion on the right side, followed by the left, until you reach the torque spec of 45 Newton meters. Next, we will install the front motor haul cable. Take note of the arrows on the connectors. Make sure that they both match and that the motor haul cable is fully seated in place. When you are installing it onto the fork, ensure that it is set at the 3 o'clock position when you are looking down as the rider. A tech tip I recommend when you are installing the front motor haul cable is to position these two clasps so that the connector cannot come apart while riding. Next, we will go ahead and set the kickstand height. Using a 4mm hex wrench, you will loosen the back side of the foot. Extend it out about 4.5 inches. You'll go ahead and tighten the foot back in place. When measuring the length that you need to adjust, make sure you are measuring from the tips of these arrows to the edge of the foot. That measurement is 2.5 inches. Now that the front wheel is on and tight, it's time to adjust the handlebars. Ensure that your pinch bolts on your stem are tight and that your stem is straight with your front wheel. Ensure while tightening these bolts, you are using your 5mm hex wrench and tighten them in an alternating fashion until you reach the 6 to 8 Newton-meter torque spec. Now that your stem is straight with your front wheel, refer to the video in the description below on how to fine-tune and adjust the controls on your handlebar. In most cases, the battery in your bike will come installed when you receive it. In this case, the battery did not come installed. So let's show you how to install the battery. First, you'll take your key and unlock the latch. Next, turn your wheel slightly to install the bottom side of the battery first. Then latch your battery in place, followed by locking it in place. Now that you have finished assembling your Hummer EV all-wheel drive e-bike, all you will need to do is put air in the tires. The tires get aired up to 30 psi. Once you have aired up your tires, refer to your owner's manual for further torque specs on all your nuts and bolts.